And I am Yves Engler coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Foreign Policy Hours, a critical look, about 151, according to my email thing today, sessions. So I guess almost 3 years now. Uh, and Yeah, there's actually lots of developments in Canadian foreign policy and world affairs. So I'm going to get right to it. And yeah, just one other. Yeah. First thing, Le Devoir reported that Montreal last year was 3.9 degrees Celsius above the period before the industrial age from like 1870 something, I think, to around 1900. So globally, it's more than we're over 1.5 degrees Celsius increase temperature, but Montreal 3.9. Obviously, it's 1 year, so it's not indicative of everything, but nonetheless, that's an incredible increase in the city's temperature. Le Devoir also reported about this UN report saying that Canada is not going to meet its objectives for the 10 years coming forward with regards to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So the Trudeau government's objectives are too small, and we're still not going to meet them. The Financial Post had the front page of the business section in National Post on Thursday, I think it was, headline Oil Gas Output to Rise in 2025, and showed all the tar sands companies have plans. I think one of them was 10% increase, a couple of them were like 3.5%, 4% increase in oil output. Their focus was, well, is this a good idea when we don't know what's happening with Donald Trump's tariffs? That was their focus, not is this a good idea because well, let's just look at LA. Let's look at all the other places we're seeing where greater and greater uh, climate disturbances are wreaking havoc. Anyways, that's where we're at, and Canada is going to continue expanding its tar sands no matter what. And of course, the UN report made it very clear that the reason Canada is not even coming close to these pitiful objectives in greenhouse gas emissions is basically entirely because of oil extraction in Alberta. There was a story about in one of the business sections about the Canadian pensions and their investments globally. Maybe it was the Financial Times, the British paper. I'm not sure where I saw it, but they have a passage that says, with international offices to invest in critical infrastructure spanning London's ports to Brazil's utilities and India's transport networks, Canada's pension funds are major players in global private markets. A high proportion of their holdings are international, partly because many critical infrastructure assets in Canada, such as airports, are publicly owned. So the Canadian pensions are going around in private ownership of all kinds of infrastructure that we still keep in publicly run here, which has always been an element to sort of the imperial process. Is there's how things are treated elsewhere and how they're treated at home. You see all kinds of stuff with that with like Canadian banks, for instance. We have very strict regulations of banks still, but Canadian banks buy up countries' financial sectors, many countries. There's Barrick Gold threatened to shut down its operations in Mali over this dispute where some of their executives are in jail. There's a piece in that Owen Schock has, I think, in today's uh, Canadian Dimension that goes over Barrick's operations in Tanzania, the legal case. They kind of had a victory in terms of their legal case in Ontario on their regarding their operations in Tanzania. Basically, the court wouldn't hear the case, not because they didn't do bad things, but basically saying it's not the right jurisdiction. And then a bit about what some of the stuff's going on in Mali with their big dispute with the government there. And we're talking about serious amounts of money. I believe Barrick said more than 10 billion they've invested in Mali. The Globe had a piece about the fighting in eastern Congo is really picking up. Apparently, over 100,000 people have been displaced since the start of the year. And and of course, this is Rwandan-backed aggression or Rwandan, not just backed, but Rwandan aggression. And the Globe had a piece, Jeffrey York, who's their correspondent in South Africa, who's he's good for the corporate media. He's very good for the corporate media, and and he's been pretty good on the whole Rwanda issue and what happened in the genocide and all that stuff. And in Congo, and he has a piece headlined "Rwandan attack killed 17 in Congo," UN says. And so there was this attack on a refugee camp. It's like 6 months ago, and there was a UN investigation, and they said it was the Rwandan military that perpetrated this crime, and 17 people were killed in it. And it just the story kind of confirms again that we know there's 4,000 Rwandan troops, and there's been a big dispute. Al Jazeera had on the supposed leader of the M23 to sort of make the argument that this is all the Tutsis in Eastern Congo are being mistreated, and this is just defensive, and we've been destabilizing Eastern Congo for 30 years, killing millions of people, all because it's discrimination against Tutsi, and uh, and that led to Rwanda actually, or sorry, Congo expelling. I don't know the specifics, but targeting Al Jazeera, which probably not a good move, but it certainly was not. It was very dubious of Al Jazeera to run this nonsense, basically justifying Rwanda's criminality in eastern Congo, and when the evidence is just overwhelming of Rwandan involvement. And this is just the latest phase, and this is again 30 years of just mayhem in eastern Congo. Journal de Montréal today had a piece headlined Ottawa incapable d'expulser un dangereux criminel. And so it's this Ottawa is unable to expel this dangerous criminal. And it's someone of Haitian descent. And 15 years ago, he was involved in this drug incident where apparently he cut off two fingers of somebody and people were killed in this sort of, I'm not exactly clear what happened, but some sort of drug battle. I think it seems clear he did something pretty bad 15 or 17 years ago. He doesn't look very old, so he almost certainly came here when he was very young. I guess he was born in Haiti, and they were basically making he spent I think he was in jail until 2017. I think he spent, they said, 5 or 6 years in jail in Canada for this at least this one incident, and I think maybe some other incident. He clearly has this sort of criminal background, and they're basically the frame of Journal de Montréal is, well, why can't we kick him out? And that may be the law, but it's very dubious to have somebody who's basically grows up in Canada. There's many instances of this where Canada expels these people who basically grew up in Canada. They are particularly around Haiti, but there's other countries as well. They don't really have any connection to Haiti except that they were born there. They're where they got involved in criminal activity was in Canada. It was nothing to do with Haiti, and then the Canadian government kicks them out. Even in this case, the guy did spend did his time, if you like, in jail. And it just really, to me, kind of fascinating to see how the Journal de Montréal frames this. Maybe, in some sense, legally, there are, of course, regulations in terms of if you don't have citizenship and what happens if you are involved in criminal activity. But the court, apparently the judges have said that he's made better. He's got kids now here, and sort of explanation of why he's not being expelled. But this is really, in my opinion, is a big scandal of this whole process of basically expelling Canadians of Haitian descent. I mean, but all essence, they're Canadians to a country that obviously is way less capable. Well, first of all, it's unfair to them. They're not actually, they may not even speak the language. They may not. But obviously much less capable of dealing with maybe assisting them in shifting gears or changing their lifestyle or whatever. On Haiti as well, yesterday was the 15th anniversary of the horrible earthquake that destroyed much of Port-au-Prince and left tens and tens of thousands dead. I think that the number that's thrown around of 300,000 is is probably an exaggeration and probably a fairly significant exaggeration. There was stuff done on that, I think, um, many years ago now, but it's probably more in the 50, 100,000 people, still a stunning number of people who were killed. But there was a bit of an inflation there that was due to a series of factors of sort of the whole charity world. But the most important thing with regards to Canadian foreign policy in the 15 years of this earthquake, which was it was mind-numbing how devastating it was, is the Canadian government's reaction. This like absolutely this is something that be uh, cannot be gone around in terms of the Canadian government's reaction to the earthquake in Haiti. The Canadian government's reaction was, and we have the internal governments. This was reported on Canadian press a year after the earthquake, which was that they didn't send the heavy urban search and rescue teams that are based in Montreal, Toronto, Halifax, Vancouver, six or seven other cities, and which are designed to be these like you get in quick, they basic medical services, they got some like some supplies, exactly what you would have in a context of earthquake. They don't send those. They send 2,000 Canadian troops alongside, I think, 10 to 15,000 American troops and a few thousand more UN troops. And the government documents a year later show that the reason for doing that was fear that the power vacuum Aristide might return from South Africa, the ousted president, and there might be some sort of popular revolt amidst this sort of power vacuum in the country. So, like every human being with an ounce of humanity, like the most like racist anti-Haitian person here in Quebec, still sees this situation in Haiti as like, oh, this is horrible. We should do something. Okay, right? That's like any basic. You have to be like sociopathic to not think that you want to help. But the decision makers in Ottawa, their concern was control, right? How do we that's their whole lens of operating. How do we maintain our grip on that country? Totally, wildly damning piece of information came foreign policy, reported on by based on government documents, and then just ignored, right? Just ignored after that. But it goes really to the heart or the lack thereof heart in Canadian foreign policy thinking. Canada brought in sanctions on 131 Venezuelan officials, supposedly on the grounds of human rights, the rule of law, and democracy, because they had undermined that. Of course, Maduro was sworn in on Saturday or Sunday. The Melanie Joly spoke with Maria uh, Chamado, Maria Caracho, whatever. I forget the main opposition woman's activist. She spoke with her, and Canada said he recognizes Edmundo Gonzalez, that he won the election, and that he's the president-elect. The Americans, of course, upped their bounty on Maduro's head to $25 million. So they seem to be going down this pathway of continuing this sort of target Venezuela sort of strategy, which we'll see what happens with that. 25th Ukraine Defense Contact Group this week. Canada announced another 440 million in military assistance to Ukraine. It's not clear to me if this is actually new money or if this is just sort of part of the game of re-announcing things and kind of hyping Canada's contribution. There's a story about the Canadian naval vessel, first ever deployment to Antarctica. It just left. I believe it was from Halifax. It just left. Um, there's a story in Rabble from this Ole Hedrickson, who's with the Sierra Club or something, one of the kind of mainstream environmental groups. He's on the board of this one of these groups, and the title is "Increased Defense Spending Could Prevent Climate Disasters," and he just sort of ignores the role of the military in being, it's the biggest greenhouse gas emitter of any government agency. Of course, the Canadian Department of National Defense, like 50% of Canadian government greenhouse gas emissions or something like that. Over 50% is from D&D, and they're excluded from the targets, the government's targets to reduce its own emissions. Um, so he ignores that whole question. And he goes on all these different ways which the military can basically help with, like climate mitigation and climate kind of issues, which I don't, in one sense, I don't oppose, but really it's like, why don't you just get rid of the military and create, entities to deal with that, right? Like, um, but but uh, but he has a passage that he says, he just throws in there, it's become accepted that Canada can free ride on national defense because we're part of the American security umbrella alongside the NATO alliance. Right? She just like repeats, this is again on rabble.ca, just repeats this sort of line of like we're free riding on the Americans and we're not holding our weight under NATO. And you just go like, I mean, how does this appear? I mean, in left-wing entities, right? And we know how it appears is because the propaganda apparatus is so overwhelming and there's so much pro-military, military, increasing military spending. Oh, we're free riding. Oh, like no one ever, ever, ever contrasts Canada and Mexico, right? Like find like that's really a fascinating one. Mexico is like half the amount of its GDP and half in real dollars it spends on its military. But it trades with the US. Why, like I mean, right? Why is Canada so much more likely to be invaded than Mexico is? Why, right? We know there's only one country that can invade either of those two countries. There's only the US that could possibly invade Canada, and there's only the US could possibly invade Mexico. We know it's self-evident to anybody who thinks about it for 10 seconds. But just the propaganda is just so overwhelming. And and so it appears in rabble.ca. So the Post Media, Saturday's National Post, which was then published in, at least in the Montreal Gazette, probably most of or all of Vancouver Sun, the Edmonton Journal, across the country, is this big long piece about the Chinese balloons. Okay, I'd forgotten about the Chinese balloon story. That's about a year and a half ago. And that was a huge deal for 2 weeks, and the danger of these scary, 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 scary Chinese balloons that were spying on us. They were going to blow us up, or was we don't really know what they were doing, but it was really scary. And so, anyways, it goes into the whole story about it, and there's not really that much that interesting. One thing they point out that so after the one gets down to I think Montana, they blow it up over Montana because somebody sees it. They were aware of it. NORAD was aware of it for like days and days and da da da, because it was obviously not a threat. It was just got into a hype machine. But then they talk about so apparently when there's some other balloons that get spotted up north, they of course they shoot them, they blow them up, and so it was apparently the first ever shoot down by a U.S. fighter jet in Canadian airspace. And of course, which we knew at the time, but they repeated, I forgot about, which was that the same time they knocked us down. We don't know this for sure, but almost certainly. So the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade, which is based in Chicago, had lost one of its balloons, whatever balloons these things are. I think they cost like $10 or $50 or $20, and they used like a $500,000 missile or something to blow this thing up. And so they lost track of where their balloon was the same day they blew it up. So almost for sure it was blown up by this really wonderful defense. We're all protected now operation by these U.S. fighter jets that the Canadian fighter jets were sort of angry. They didn't. I guess there was some problem with the ice rain, and the Canadian fighter jets didn't scramble as fast as the U.S. fighter jets. So that's why the Canadian fighter jets didn't get the big defense of our sovereignty that could have been had. But yeah. So on the China file, the Chinese it was either ambassador or maybe it was from Beijing. They said that they're willing to deepen economic ties with Canada amidst Trump's threats of cutting off or of tariffs. But of course, the Canadian government acceded to not signing a trade agreement with China as part of that updating of the NAFTA a few years ago. And but clearly now they're increasingly, as the Chinese understand, Canada's boxed itself in, uh, even more depends on the U.S. And gives Trump even more leverage with the tariff question. We'll get more onto the Trump thing in a second here. The Journal de Montréal had this piece, des craintes d'ingérence étrangère en lien avec une candidature à la chefferie. Uh, I must cut off some of the libéraux, I think it would have said. But anyway, so the one of the candidates for announced for the liberal, I'm forgetting his name. He's of Indian background, uh, and he the Journal de Montréal is basically saying this guy is like a danger, foreign interference danger, because and they quote like the big they quote Thomas Junot, who's this establishment academic, and he says that the reason that it's a danger, the reason I'm forgetting his name, people can probably find his name, Arish, I forget his name. Anyway, he said some really out there comment about French language, and it's not that important for a candidate, prime minister to speak French. This guy is clearly not very serious. But anyways, in this thing about foreign interference, they quote Thomas Junot saying, for me, his opposition to the foreign registry is the reddest of red flags. Okay, so basically, it's saying this guy, he's a threat of foreign interference because he opposes the foreign interference or the foreign registry. Okay, that they is all part of this whole foreign interference thing. So he's not claiming, Thomas Junot's not claiming that like the guy is, an operative of the Indian government or the Chinese government or whatever. He's just saying because he opposed the registry, that therefore is the reddest of all red flags about his nefarious foreign ties, which is just like this is where the bar's at, right? This is where things are going, and you just see this whole foreign interference scam. It's like just the farcical nature of the whole thing played out in the last few days. Okay, so here you have a situation where Donald Trump is like, he's been doing all he's been doing for 6 weeks now about 51st state. Then he ratchets that up, and then he ratchets it up to he basically suggests that he was involved in having Trudeau go. He's kind of a little bit of that with Freeland. He's putting out maps with Canada as part of the U.S. Then he goes and he says, economic force. We'll use economic force to turn Canada into 51st state. And then simultaneously, you got Elon Musk, who's like bought up Twitter and is clearly using Twitter, just repeatedly intervening in Canadian politics, trying to undermine Trudeau, working on behalf of Polyev, all like totally, in the open and aggressive. And like, just on a little bit of a side, the algorithm of X has clearly been messed with to make it that much more right wing in recent weeks. I've really noticed that on a personal level. So you got Musk like using his control over this media outlet to push this hardline right wing agenda. And I mean, the level of like foreign interference is absolutely off the charts. And the day after Trump does the annexation economic force kind of comment threat, alongside threatening to invade, not with just economic force, with invade, suggesting he could invade Panama to do the Panama Canal in Greenland. You have the Globe Mail run an editorial about foreign interference, right? Basically talking about China, right? And talking about the liberals' leadership race, being this is their lead editorial. This is the official position. This is the next day after Trump's comments. Same thing, Brian Lilly in the Toronto Sun, pushing the same line as danger. The really loose regulations the Liberal Party has around registration for to become a member to vote in elections is like this open to foreign interference. And when you get into this, there's two parts, right? Okay, to contrast, like I'm not saying I'm fine. I don't have a problem with the liberal uh, membership vote. I understand why they do it, and they're trying to make it as open as possible. And so you bring in restrictions, So I get that. And now maybe it's gone too far. I can hear that discussion either way. Okay, but this is nothing. A national election for the leader of the party is nothing compared to a riding. Okay, the ability to manipulate a riding with small numbers is so much more strict, doable than like, cross Canada. We're probably talking about 100,000 people who are going to vote in the Liberal nomination. Maybe it's going to be even more than I don't know, but it's a big thing. So it's nothing to do with the little like getting 50 people out to a riding association, get one individual elected to be the candidate for the party. Okay, so it's nothing to do with that, and they're kind of like they're not disassociating these two things when they have this discussion. Okay. Now, so the other part about the foreign interference, so that's the Han Dong story. That's the big foreign interference. Okay, there was supposedly a bus, some international Chinese students, and China's run Canada ever since having Han Dong elected, become the liberal candidate in the Toronto ride. Okay, that's the one side. The other big story about foreign interference, of course, is a Chew in Richmond, which is his whole story. He was a conservative MP who lost in the election, and it seems like the reason he lost is because the Chinese community in Richmond, in his riding, either didn't vote or voted for the Liberal. That does seem correct. But his whole story is it's the WeChat, right? It's the Chinese social media company that a bunch of people in his riding, are on because they grew up in China or whatever. They speak Mandarin or so and that the algorithm there was like used to like work against them. Okay, but again, this is like one riding, one MP. Now we're talking about Elon Musk like openly on the whole of this Twitter platform, an infinitely more important platform than WeChat in one riding, and and so he's doing this. This is all like totally in the open of like this interference in Canadian politics, but they're still focused on the Chinese threat as Donald Trump talks about annexing Canada through force of or through economic force. Is pretty remarkable to see, and it just obviously just makes a mockery of the whole foreign affairs. The whole foreign affairs thing scam, of course, is about just supporting empire. To repeat, the foreign interference scam, or the foreign interference brouhaha is about foreign interference. It's about U.S. interference in Canadian politics to whip up a brouhaha about Chinese interference. Um, Now, one of the things I wrote a piece about this week. It was just updating an idea I've written about and talked about previous sessions, which is this contrast. So you have this time when Trump's talking about annexing Canada, and then he's also talking about how Canada needs to increase military spending, which are contradictory ideas. It's very rare for you talk about like threatening another country, and then you're talking about like that country needs to increase its military spending, right? That doesn't really mesh. If you would think our military spending increase would be about stopping the US ability to annex, right? But of course, as we know, that's not what the Canadian military is structured to do. The Canadian military is structured to enable the US empire. And CTV had a story kind of going into some of this stuff, kind of touching on it, somewhat tentatively, but going in the right direction. Some interesting about like how many US troops are in Canada. And so they say that there's 156 active duty members of the US military deployed in the country. About 50 of them are with NORAD, and another 100 or a little bit more than 100 are in a number of different things, mostly these sort of exchange programs, which are extensive, of course, between the Canadian and US military. And in this piece, which is all like it asks the right question and then it quotes all these like pro-US empire Canadian military people who are like, US is doing everything for our defense and da da da, whatever, right? So these people who totally justify all this, there's no problem at all with Canada being completely connected into US military type people. Um, but in it they point out that a Canadian Rear Admiral is vice commander of US Navy's East Coast and North Atlantic Fleet. So a Canadian's number two of this whole East Coast, North Atlantic, U.S. Navy. I don't know how many are in a fleet, but a lot of vessels, presumably. And we know that, right? Like this is, and there was the Canadian ear who becomes the chief of the defense staff. He headed up 35,000 foreign troops in Iraq, right? He was on an exchange program in the U.S. and he, as part of that, he just helped the American military. He oversaw huge numbers of foreign troops in Iraq during the Iraq War, which Canada, of course, wasn't part of officially. Um, and so they're right. These military people are completely right to say that the U.S. treats the Canadian military wonderfully. I mean, from a Canadian military perspective, they'll give them like all these high status positions, totally fluidly integrate them into, the most advanced weaponry in the world, on and on and on. And so it is a unique relationship between different militaries anywhere in the world. Now, one of the things that I think needs to come out of this whole Trump craziness of annexation and threatening, military control around the world is in this. Are we going to see any Canadian parliamentarians that are actually going to come out and start saying we need an independent Canadian foreign policy? We need the U.S. empire is out of control. I mean, it's been out of control, long time. We could say, 100 years, 70 years, or whatever point you want to start. But so uh, you could, but th this is something kind of like Canada is being targeted within the sort of Trump's kind of craziness. And it seems to me the NDP would be in a position where I think you'd find a fair bit of public support for starting to go in that direction of saying we need to like disentangulate ourselves from this U.S. imperial machine, right? We shouldn't be sending military wherever the U.S. is sending military. We should be looking at this kind of stuff. They should be making a mockery of the foreign interference stuff. The problem for the NDP is, and there's polling I just saw that, Canadians do not like Donald Trump. Canadians do not like Elon Musk, right? There's polling that shows this. It's like a fifth of the lesson with Elon Musk, a fifth of the population is supportive of this stuff, okay? According to these polls, which I broadly believe. And obviously should be more polling done. So there theoretically is a space to sort of, take up some of this kind of like outlook and kind of rhetoric. But the problem for the NDP is they bought into so much of it. They're into the China, they're into the foreign interference, they're into the NATO proxy war, they're into supporting the core group in Haiti, right? They've bought into so much of it that as much as there may be space that may make sense politically now to kind of take up a kind of the ugly American, if you want to use that kind of, oh, Donald Trump is the ugly American and play to a sort of certain nationalist Canadian, whatever, they they're kind of caught in that they basically have been boosting the U.S. empire so much that it's tricky. So I'm curious to see where this goes with because there's some a little bit of signs and things sort of pushing some little bits, very, very small steps in some of this direction. Shifting gears a little bit, I'm going to try to run through a fair bit of stuff quickly here. The Trudeau put out statement by the Prime Minister on the National Day of Remembrance for Victims of Air Disasters. And of course, the National Day of Remembrance of Victims of Air Disasters is about not some bad plane accident in Canada. It's about, of course, the Iranians shooting down a plane by accident after the Americans crudely violated international law by assassinating 10 people in Iraq, including the General Soleimani, the Iranian top IRGC official. Polyev put out a statement 5 days ago today. 176 people, including 55 Canadians and 30 more who call Canada home, were murdered by the terrorist IRGC on flight PS 752. We honor their memory and pray for the families whose lives were devastated as we fight for justice. The tyrants in Tehran will never. I think I cut off the rest. But anyways, the tyrants in Tehran are the tyrants and tyrants and tyrants, and they just blew up a plane for the sake of blowing a plane because they're tyrants. That was Poilievre's message. Nothing about the context, nothing about what happened 4 days before that. And that's exactly what's happening everywhere now, right? What actually happened is just being disappeared in this official story. And now we actually have a National Day of Remembrance, all part of this Target Iran affair that the Canadian government, all parties really are buying into, on board with. Last week, I talked about the Lebanese armed forces in a piece in the Globe and Mail about the importance of Canada supporting Lebanese armed forces. I think I said that I would look into the matter, and I hadn't really looked into it. And I did a little bit of research on the funding Canada's been giving. This is the Lebanese armed forces that is like the Americans apparently are providing half of its military's budget. The UK is given, I think I saw something saying 100 million pounds over a decade or some period of time. Canada's put in, I don't know an exact number, but it seems almost certainly it's tens of millions of dollars. And there's just tons of meetings between the Canadian ambassador and the head of the Lebanese armed forces, who just became the president, Joseph Aoun, I think is how you pronounce it, and Canadian military officials. All three of the last Canadian ambassadors met with him, who's the head of Lebanese armed forces, uh, and training Lebanese armed forces initiative with the UK, and basically it's all part of building up a force. Americans are totally explicit about it, to challenge Hezbollah's power. And when Israel announced its invasion, the Lebanese armed forces just fled. Right? They left their spots in southern Lebanon because they weren't going to put up any resistance to Israel's invasion. So I don't like in, I mean, this is obviously up to Lebanese to decide, but on the surface of it, it makes sense to have national institutions that it would be, in an ideal world, if you're going to have armed forces, it would be a national armed forces, and there wouldn't be this, militia that's Hezbollah, right? That makes sense to me. But that's like you operate in the real world, and the real world is Israel's invaded Lebanon 6 times, and that you know Hezbollah was created to end an 18-year Israeli occupation, and then 2006 they successfully resisted, and more recently I wouldn't say they didn't do well, but Israel may well have gone all the way to Beirut again if it wasn't for Hezbollah. And they certainly, if it was just the Lebanese military, if Israel would have wanted to go to Beirut, they would have gone to Beirut. So this whole business of building up the Lebanese military, and that's all framed as countering Iranian influence. Well, as if U.S. Canadian influence in Lebanon is a benevolent affair, right? And this is the U.S. and Canada just supported this Israeli onslaught that left almost 3,000 people dead, that destroyed huge amounts of infrastructure, that displaced a quarter of the country, as if these are the saviors of Lebanon that's being presented when we're building up the military. So there's a whole game going on, and a piece that it hasn't been published yet, but yeah, I wrote goes into all this sort of history, 2 decades of Canadian work to undercut Hezbollah, and it goes back into 58, and Canada sent troops to Lebanon in 58 as part of its UN mission, which was designed to basically maintain the elite domination, to push back against what they framed as Nasser's incursion, Nasser's influence. So secular pan-Arabist influence within Lebanon, and the Americans invade in July of 58, when Canadians are there, and Canada supports that. And I go into a little bit of this history, and so this is a long history, but there's a recent phase of the past 20 or so years, especially since Hezbollah had success in 2006 against the Israelis, of Canada working to undercut Hezbollah and to bolstering forces within Lebanon that are less amenable or hostile to Hezbollah. Um, On the Israel file, there's a story in the Toronto Sun or Winnipeg Sun about the Canadian charity loses status over aid to Israel. Nikki Ashton tweeted it out, which is good about the Naaman Foundation and some of the stuff there. Uh, Rabbi Mivaser had a post about Honest Reporting Canada paying students to do its propaganda, and that's still a registered charity, Honest Reporting Canada. The Samira Mohideen, journalist in Toronto, she was locked out of Twitter for reporting about the Honest Reporting Canada's assistant director, Robert Walker, that he was charged with 17 counts of mischief for spray painting anti-Palestinian graffiti around Toronto. And she was locked out of Twitter for reporting, going to the courthouse and reporting on this because they were framing it as like I don't know, sort of like malicious slander against individual or like personal affairs, even though of course this is obviously a political issue. There's a story, or Dmitry Lascaris posted about Israel bonds sending out an announcement that the TSFA regulations have bumped up to $102,000 this year, meaning I don't exactly know how the tax rules work, but basically you can put money into these TFSAs and they don't have to you can don't have to pay taxes on it. But basically, it's a way. It can be a way. You can buy Israel bonds with these TFSAs, apparently, according to Israel bonds. So if you want to help the Israeli government prosecute its or to continue its Holocaust in Gaza, you can max out your TFSA on Israel bonds and save contributions to the healthcare system in Canada. Le Devoir reported on Friday that this is the 1 year of the big announcement and plan that was opened about um, refugees from Gaza. I think it was initially announced as 1,000, and they bumped it up to 5,000. Canada would take in 5,000 Palestinians from Gaza. And after 1 year, 550 have made it to Canada, according to Le Devoir. Uh, and previous Le Devoir reporting went into, in fact, it was actually mostly Canadian security requirements that was stopping people from coming. It wasn't Egyptian, and it wasn't even, at least early on, wasn't even Israeli blocking of people from leaving, but it was Canadian, the overzealousness of the Canadian security restrictions, or you had to provide like proof that you know nothing to do with Hamas, and they asked doctors if they had ever uh, treated resistance fighters, but doctors by law, international law, like have to. You can't be like discriminating against, treatment. So there's all these different reports that have gone on. I talked about that in previous episodes. Now, back in November, Haaretz reported that more than 10,000 Israelis had come to Canada, and the Canadian government adopted this program, fee exempt, so free to any Israeli can go for a 3 year uh, study or work permit, and then that's basically a pathway to permanent residency and citizenship. And as of November, they were saying, Haaretz was saying that 10,000 Israelis come. It's not clear if they're all on this, but most of them are almost certainly. I mean, some may just come in for, I guess, a couple months and like more on a tourist visa, but the vast majority are probably there. So here you have a situation where, again, this I wrote about this is like, the society, the genocidal Jewish supremacist society committing the Holocaust. It's like, oh yeah, come in, no problem, make it. Those who are facing the Holocaust are, a security check through the wazoo, and very few of them come. And we, of course, know that there's so many of these Israelis coming, as many Canadian citizens on top of that, have committed the crimes, right? They're in, they've dozens, certainly dozens, probably hundreds even, were in Gaza and killing. Um, and Yeah, so going on a little long here, I'm going to cut into a few different things. Uh, I did a piece on the rape. Haven't submitted it anywhere yet. There was two different reports. So the big Israeli paper 10 days ago or so said that the prosecutor for the Southern District um, repeated that there is no victim. There is no victim, no Israeli victim of rape on October 7th. And then 3 or 4 days ago, Haaretz reported that the Israelis are blocking the UN's special rapporteur on sexual violence and conflict zones, who's actually, I think, the deputy secretary general of the UN, who they had actually previously had positive because the initial thing she did was basically was used by the media to suggest there was significant sexual assault on October 7th, even though she didn't actually say that. But anyway, so I won't get into that. But so there's no victim. There's no victim. Still, 15 months later, there is no name of an Israeli rape victim of all the Brua. So I did a search on the Canadian newsstand, and I found about 1,000 mentions since October 7th, 15 months of Hamas Israel rape. 850, and then I did about 100 was exact numbers in front, 100 around 150 more. That was Hamas. What did I do? Hamas Israel sexual assault. They did sexual assault in quotations. The vast majority of the articles, I obviously didn't read all these articles, but the vast majority are referring to it. And all of the leaders of the political parties, the big political parties, stated that there's Hamas rape, but there's no victim. Canada put up money. They put $1 million. They offered RCMP to help the Israelis with their investigation. There's no name still at this point, and there's no media that's ever reported on that. I don't think any Canadian media has ever reported on the fact there's no name. It's crazy, and it's still being mobilized. And we have all kinds of evidence of Israeli sexual rape and sexual violence against Palestinians. So the Israelis are blocking UN probes into Hamas. They're blocking UN probes into Hamas's rape. Okay, they don't want the UN to get into looking at that question. The head of the Southern Prosecutor's Office, Israel, talks about how they contacted every single, and this was already knew this. It's all just confirming what was already known. They contacted every single sexual assault center in Israel. Nobody was brought forward. There's people who's like we were concerned of, but there's no one who like I was raped. I need assistance, support, whatever. So it's a remarkable blood libel, really, against Palestinians. I mean, it's really been used in the most horrific way. And yeah, so I don't have much time left. I guess I'll just skip a couple of these things. I did want to talk about this thing with John Clarke. And John Clarke is somebody, former head of OCAP, or organizer with OCAP, Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, somebody who he blurbed my People's History of the Canadian Military book, or Stand on Guard for Whom, People's History of the Canadian Military book. He's somebody who he's clearly pro-Palestine. I interviewed him on Palestine 10 months ago, a year ago. I did an interview with him. Somebody who I respect, and I think he's definitely pro-Palestinian activist, whatever. And so Caitlin Johnston posts this thing, which I hadn't seen until Clarke posted about it on Facebook, and she says in this post, first end the act of genocide, then in capital, talk to me about your concerns regarding a rise in anti-Semitism. This isn't one of those, quote, we can walk and chew gum at the same time things. No, we absolutely cannot, because anti-Semitism is used to deflect criticism of the genocide. Even if everything Israel defenders are saying about rising anti-Semitism was true, and it most assuredly isn't, genocide is an infinitely more urgent concern than hurt feelings and graffiti. Resolve that first, then we can talk about your far less urgent concerns. I completely agree with Johnston's perspective. It is premised on anti-Jewishness is a bad thing. That is im completely implicitly, strongly implicit. So it's that's there, but it's basically saying there's been so much lying, there's been so much distortion, there's been so much mobilization of this that, like, I can't get into this discussion while there's a Holocaust going on in Gaza, that this is being used to enable that Holocaust. Um, and it brings in a couple of things that I think are, that are based upon. First, the obvious thing is that what's happening in Gaza is so horrific that that's so much more important than everything. Okay, that's obvious. But then it's also, I think, implicitly, it doesn't state this, but I think it's implicit, is saying this, like we don't even have an example of all this brouhaha about anti-Semitism. We don't even have an example of someone going to the hospital. Okay, we don't even, they haven't, there's not even an example of somebody sent to the hospital, for God's sakes, right? Like, yes, there's all these issues of late at night, 3 in the morning, the synagogue had something happen to its window, and there's all kinds of stories. Jewish school, there's more than a dozen, I don't know, 15, 20. We don't know who's doing all this. That's a very important question. I won't get into all that. But okay, then but then there is actually, I think, implicit is actually then the material reality. The Canadian Jewish community is not oppressed, right? And that needs to be stated over and over again. As much as no one is willing to talk about it, we talk about all these indicators, social economic indicators, but by every single social economic indicator except for hate crimes, the Canadian Jewish community is not oppressed. In fact, it's usually doing better than average on the majority of those indicators. So that's also, I think, kind of implicit in what Johnson's saying. And then this is what John Clarke says in response to this. Starts off with a load of shameful nonsense. That's how he starts his post on Facebook. And he goes in a bunch of it. Some of it's more nuanced, but then he concludes by saying that this person puts out such a message and links it to Palestinian cause is sad. That the message resonates on the left is deeply depressing. It's time for some clarity and for some principles on such fundamental issues as this one. So he goes hard. He goes hard at what she's posted, which I think is absolutely imminently reasonable. I'm not agnostic to anti-Semitism. If someone comes to me, if I'm somewhere and someone says something that's clearly anti-Jewish, I will definitely say that's wrong. That's anti-Semitic. And obviously, if I saw someone doing something, if I saw someone beating somebody or whatever that was anti-Jewish, I would intervene. Okay, that's like completely, let's be real, absolutely clear about that. But I'm approaching agnostic on like how do you deal with it when it's just been politicized to such ends? You know that the vast majority of it are just lies, and it's all being mobilized for something so horrible. And what it's actually, what it's actually about it's not that impactful. The Canadian Jewish community is not in a bad situation, right? So in that context, like, what the hell you do? Like, I'm not agnostic. If you ask me, do I condemn anti-Semitism? Yes, I condemn anti-Semitism. But from a practical reality, I am something approaching agnostic because it's a minefield that's been, set up that I mean, you're just boxed in. So, okay, now someone responds to this is getting closer to my sentiment on this matter. Somebody responds to Clarke saying, even absent an active genocide in Palestine, brackets, the ending of which is the number one concern of any decent human being. The slandering of decent people as anti-Semitic by liars and miscreants is a far greater problem than anti-Semitism itself. These lies also need to stop. And I totally agree with this. In the last 25 years, when I've been engaged in political activity, the amount of harm that I've seen done to people by lies about people opposing apartheid being, or the mowing of the lawns in the previous operations in Gaza, the harm I've seen done to people being falsely accused of being anti-Jewish is worse than the impact of all this anti-Semitism we're hearing about. And then again, this is pre-genocide. Let's go back 15 months. It's unbelievable, in my opinion. It's not surprising. Not surprising that someone like John Clarke would go into this. We're talking about a situation. Okay, Jim Stanford, prominent person on the left, Maud Barlow, Jagmeet Singh. They've talked more about anti-Semitism over the past 50 months of Holocaust, or as much as they have about the Holocaust. Okay? You go further into the left. You go further into the left. You go to former Independent Jewish Voices. Forgetting his name right now. He calls a caricature in La Presse, a cartoon caricature equating Netanyahu to Dracula. He calls that anti-Semitic. That's like this is a former communications or whatever, Aaron Lakoff, former communications IJV. He's like, this was a brilliant friggin' comic. This was a brilliant contribution to justice. It's being accused of anti-Semitism. You got people like L. Jones, far and to left, who are refusing to refer to this as white supremacy. John Clarke, I bet you, I almost guarantee you, John Clarke's never referred to this as Jewish supremacy. In 15 months, he's probably never referred to it as Jewish supremacy. He's referred to it as anti-Semitism or he's talked about Jewish supremacy. So 15 months of a Holocaust in the name of advancing Jewish supremacy, and you've talked about anti-Semitism more than you've talked about Jewish supremacy. So there's a much bigger problem on the left of upholding Jewish supremacy than there is a problem of anti-Semitism. Anyways, so it's just this needs to be confronted. It needs to be confronted directly. It didn't no backing down to these people who continue to this ideological stick that's being beaten and beaten and beaten to justify the Holocaust. Not only that, to justify this war against like decent people in Canada. I mean, this is an authoritarian fascist onslaught by the Zionist movement. It's remarkable. They're trying to end all kinds of civil liberties, a total attack, war. And our people on our side are like hand-wringing, well, we have to take this anti-Semitism thing seriously. We have to really make it important. And like and like John Clarke was involved with OCAP, right? Amidst these battles, I try to make the analogy. What's the analogy that holds? They're at war with us. They're at war. They destroyed Jeremy Corbyn on this business. They're at war with the left. It's clear they're at war with the left on all this stuff. What's the analogy? The analogy is you're in a strike. John Clarke with the OCAP. So OCAP's mobilizing, for all kinds of good stuff in the early 2000s in Toronto, around welfare payments and housing, all this stuff, different stuff. And there's people in OCAP who do things that you don't really, I don't know what they did. I don't know. I'm not just coming up with general. You're involved in this huge battle. The right-wing media is going after you endlessly. And somebody in OCAP busted a couple windows, or maybe they even hit somebody. I don't know, whatever. They did something. Do you talk about it? Do you have a whole hand wring you talk, or do you just sort of stay silent and say, maybe I don't think that was the greatest thing that happened, but there's a war on us where this person was, broadly speaking, going in the right direction, wanted right, maybe made an error. I'm not going to hand wring about it, but this is where we're still at. This is where the left, much of the left, and this is, like I said, this is really big swaths. You have the establishment left, like a Maud Barlow or Jim Stanford, who haven't said a word about this Holocaust, and then even into much further into activist left, still doing this kind of stuff. Anyways, two things on a bit more positive note. The Hamilton District School Board adopted an anti-Palestinian racist motion, or anti-Palestinian racism motion. So there's some process about talking about anti-Palestinian racism. And then that Ottawa MPP, Lisa MacLeod, this crazy Zionist on Twitter, she was forced to apologize for this hateful comment where she went after the conservative candidate in her running for a seat provincially that she's let go, Nepean, some suburb of Ottawa, and she basically said Sharia law. So this conservative, like running for the conservative position in the riding, she said, if you want Sharia law in Ottawa, vote for him, even though the guy's he's a freaking conservative. Anyways, so unfortunately was forced to apologize. She was just the JNF in Ottawa gave her the big the Negev. She was the one of the people the Negev thing in Ottawa, JNF. So it's good to see the Zionist hit back. I went on way too long. It's 7 o'clock, but let's go with maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes or something like that for comments and questions. And I'll make Laura a co-host. Go ahead, Nadia.
Yes, hello, Eve. I don't know how you don't get depressed after all this. Uh, I'm really depressed about both Elon Musk and Trump hijacking government. But let me tell you, François Brousseau, who is the main journalist both for Radio-Canada and Le Devoir, had I don't know if you've seen it, an article this morning in Le Devoir clamping down on Maduro as illegitimate and authoritarian and shouldn't be illegal and he shouldn't even be there. And then, you'd think that the readers of Le Devoir are more educated or more knowledgeable, but then they say, oh, you when I write, they say, oh, you're dumping on the Americans. Which part of it don't they understand? 227 out of 244 years since the American since the United States was founded, 227 out of 244 years, they were warmongering all over the world. In other words, 93% of the time, they're warmongering somewhere, and they have 800 uh, uh, army bases around the world in 80 countries. So, where is the danger coming from? Is it coming from the United States or from China or from Russia? It's just mind-boggling. And please tell me, where do you get your energy and your calmness not to be really angry and not to be depressed?
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, the propaganda is unbelievable, even in a more sophisticated place like Le Devoir, where they wouldn't deny any of the facts that you just kind of laid out. The CTV article actually said that U.S. troops are in 170 countries. This one about them being 156 U.S. troops being in Canada. Um, so yeah, I mean, I have to say what's happened in Gaza, I find, I would say it has definitely traumatized me to a certain extent. Over the last few months, I've started to be, it's a kind of a, it's kind of a weird one where, I look at Al Jazeera, quite regularly to sort of find out what's like happened or like kind of the horrors that have happened. But then I also, uh, recognize that it has a sort of emotionally, it is kind of painful to see. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not the toll of this stuff is not very, compared to what other people are feeling. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. We can just do what we can do, and we can, yeah, keep going. I don't. There's no real sort of. I don't know where do I get my energy. I have lots of energy. I mean, that's just it's something that's been my. I've been like that since I was, I don't know, whatever, two or whenever, right? So whether I spent a lot of energy playing hockey like I did from the age of 5 to 18, or I spent a lot of energy, whatever, right? So, uh, but yeah, there was this other part, but no, the propaganda is unbelievable, but I do think that there is like, there is an understanding. I think the U.S. has lost, like, the what's happened in Gaza has been a real blow to U.S. The little bit of, sort of moral weight the U.S. had in the world. and that even including into Canada. Canada's less so than most of Africa or Latin America or wherever where people are all appalled, or the vast majority of people are appalled with what Israel's doing and U.S. backing. But I think that there is sort of anti-American kind of sentiment as a pretty high point. So if you did have that political forces that articulated that, I haven't even seen any group, let alone like a politician. Has anyone seen a group over the past 6 days or whatever since Trump made these comments to like say that Canada should be operating independent foreign policy? Like I haven't seen. I want to get out an email from the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute like stating this and do it. I want to do an action alert. I don't know if I'm going to do it, but an action alert sort of going at Jagmeet Singh to push him in that direction. But I haven't even seen any like really kind of like activist group coming out and saying, okay, we need an independent Canadian foreign policy. This is madness. He's threatened to annex Canada with economic force. He's threatened to invade Greenland and Panama. We want nothing to do with all this craziness, right? Like there's not, I don't even not even seeing that articulated. Like no one is articulating that. Like it's wild. Um, but so I think if you actually had a politician articulating this, you find that there's like already there's a fair bit of like, you know, belief that many people actually already believe that. And then if there was any kind of voice, pushing that, you'd find that quite a few people would be quite receptive to that quickly. But yeah, so
Okay, Yuri, go ahead.
Thank you. Hey Eve, it's yeah, no, I mean it's I wanted to I actually have like a specific question, but I actually just wanted to say like I find it stunning given what Israel is doing. This is the I mean, Israel has done this kind of state terrorism towards the Palestinians before, but Israel has taken what Israel's doing right now is genocide. They have taken evil to a whole nother level. The mask of Zionism has been completely ripped off. This is a fucking far right coalition government led by Netanyahu's Likud party, and he's only doing this to avoid like being prosecuted for very petty corruption. I don't know like what more like needs to be done for people to stop doing this nonsense where they punch left against people who are bravely speaking out. And like I read Caitlin Johnston, she's very careful in how she articulates herself. Everything she's been saying about Palestine, she is simply spot on. And the fact and more nonsense about complaining about mostly non-existent anti-Semitism, but like if they are going to be so oversensitive at this point, can they at least just like shut up and let like real people, brave people do like what needs to be done to fight against Zionism, which is a fucking cancer on like everything and anything now? Even Jeremy Corbyn, who was supposed to be the best politician you can imagine on Palestine, continuously kept throwing people under the bus, even when they were Jewish anti-Zionist voices.
yeah.
Like,
No, the power of the stick, the power of the fear and the power of all this stuff is remarkable. Honestly,
no, it's not that. We keep digging our own grave. You see this with Syria as well. You see this with Syria as well, where people can use their brain 100% on Palestine, and then are dumb as doornails when it comes to Syria. When this is that has done the most to actually defend Palestinian sovereignty, Lebanese sovereignty, and the left just completely throws the country under throws that country under the bus when this is literally Iraq, Afghanistan
Yeah, I mean,
101 again. So like
I guess it's is it the power of media and the power of propaganda becomes so overwhelming that when I don't know what the full explanation is.
it
I think
probably is that
it's like
because it does affect the best of the left sometimes,
it affects,
clearly.
no, it affects me. I mean, okay, I read this piece in the New York Times about uh, fentanyl. They had this piece in fentanyl in Mexico. Okay,
Mhm.
3, 4, 5 days ago, big piece. I didn't really read it really closely. I didn't think about it very much. It was kind of a weird piece. It's like this person involved in like fentanyl operation. I don't know what city it was, but it was like downtown, describing it. Very put themselves in the middle of what. Well, it's kind of a weird piece. Didn't really think much about it. I saw this listening to this report in is it Breakout News, Breakthrough News, or whatever.
Breakthrough news.
Yeah, Breakthrough News, and he was interviewing this guy from Mexico, and starts talking about this New York Times report, and like I had, I wasn't really at all in the lens of like thinking about fentanyl and how important this was to the whole Americans using to justify intervening in Mexico and stuff, and so I didn't see the propaganda. I mean, I read this story and I did not get, and then once the guy explained it, I was like, oh yeah, that was very clearly what this is, tied to this whole American intervention, whatever. Same thing, it's like there's tons of examples I have, on a personal level, like the Bangladesh stuff early on, like talking about Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is good on
Yeah.
Palestine, but very much American empire oriented most of the world. And the Bangladesh stuff, I don't know, I don't know almost nothing about Bangladesh, and the story about the overthrow and how, it all just okay, what I like. So it's obviously it works. How can it not work? And obviously the less you know of a place, the more it works. And there's all these different like dimensions to it. But like, so yeah, so it works and it gets hit at you. And then there's this like, there's an element of it that's, becomes like fear in that you tread carefully, and then whatever. There's all kinds of different dimensions to how it plays out. And it plays out a bit differently for people in different social positions, in the sense that like the more you're involved in like formal kind of like idea creation, the more you are sort of like have some connection to some institutional world, or some, the more like you have to be careful, right? And that's not just like, am I a columnist at the Globe Mail? That's obvious. We see how that plays out. But as you go further down, you go, if you're in the union, one of the reasons I got driven out of Unifor 10 years ago, I'm writing about this. I'm responding to John Clarke's thing, and I'm writing an article. And it was like, well, one of the reasons I got driven out. This is tertiary reason, but I wrote a column about the Jewish National Fund, but the Jewish National Fund being racist, and now the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, agrees basically. But there's a whole series of things that they talked to me about, and I'll they didn't fire me. We came to agreement, and I was pushed out of this like very well paid job. But that was one of the things that was brought in that this was against our policy. And so like yeah, you just like you see, I mean, it just plays out at like all the different kind of levels, and it plays out a bit differently in different people, or different positions, even activist positions, right? Like the more prominent activist, and even if you're not necessarily a paid job, but you're sort of like a prominent activist, and you got lots of different connections and whatever, you got to be a bit more careful with certain whatever. Anyways, there's all kinds of ways in which the stuff plays out.
But going forward, uh, well, last question then is this. But then going forward, I think we have to do this. I think if Palestine solidarity is going to be what you spend 100% your time on, okay, good for you. But if you're going to be supporting imperialism, like against Syria or other reactionary stuff, then just, I don't know, stay in your lane, like stay like on like Palestine. Because I'd rather like people just spend 100% of their time only focusing on one thing than this bizarre chewing gum and walking at the same time, where they support Palestine, they're 100% progressive on Palestine, and then 100% regressive when it comes to NATO, pivot to Asia, Syria, and whatnot. And all those, and then my only memo I would send to people who claim that they're for Palestinian liberation and stuff like that is that if you're still overly sensitive about non-existent anti-Semitism, if you're still more worried about hurting the frail feelings of your Zionist friends, because let's face it, a lot of us are surrounded by Zionists. I've lost Israeli friends because of my journalism on Israel and stuff like that, you have to think, what's your calling? Is your calling, when it comes to people power, that you're going to be speaking out on all forms of racism and bigotry, and that includes Zionism, Jewish supremacy? If the answer is yes, then look, it's just a risk that you have to take. I've made peace with the fact that, like, I'm going to lose friends when it comes to my position on NATO. I'll lose friends when it comes to speaking out against Zionism, and I'll lose friends if I stand up for Syria and stuff like that. But that's my calling. That is journalism. And if people are going to still, and if those on the left are still going to be overly sensitive about like non-existent anti-Semitism and all that stuff, or there's real anti-Semitism, but still anti-Palestinian racism, that is like the root of all evil, then at best, we just have to beg those people that don't say anything. Stay in your lane and let the people who are trying to fight for Palestinian liberation, especially Palestinian voices themselves, do the work. We can deal with the fucking mudslinging. What we can't deal with is this fucking cowardice and enemy from within the left that continuously does these own goals. And that's sorry
But just
for
to point out, there are a lot of
Mansky
people in
stuff, but it
Palestine
also
who are
gets
against
really gets under
Assad.
my skin.
Unfortunately, a lot of people in Palestine and in Hamas apparently were opposed to Assad and were celebrating his downfall. So that's kind of sad.
And
Anyway.
shame on them as well. That's why Al Jazeera needs to be boycotted, and people need to be protesting Al Jazeera as well,
Exactly.
especially with what they did with Rwanda recently.
Just to let you know, Eve, that the guy you're talking about, Kurt, who did that thing on fentanyl, actually, he's the co-host of a Sobrania analysis with the guy that you interviewed. And they did a whole session, and they were furious about that. They had a very passionate session, actually, on Sobrania. Okay, so I think that's all for questions, Eve.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Eve. That was a good session.
Have a good
Night
night.
all.
Yeah.